All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're going deep into a story you won't believe.
Yeah, this one is wild.
We are talking about the 1908 New York to Paris automobile race.
The Great Race.
This was not your average road trip, though. We're talking no paved roads across entire continents.
Oh yeah, they had to deal with limited gas.
And get this, they were supposed to drive across the Bering Strait.
Frozen, of course.
Yeah, in the middle of winter.
It's hard to imagine that even being possible.
It's crazy.
Especially from our perspective today.
Right, with cars that can practically drive themselves.
Back then, cars were brand new.
Like, really new.
This was just 1 year after Ford unveiled the Model T.
So basically, nobody knew if cars could even handle a trip like this.
Most people still saw them as luxury toys for the rich.
Yeah, fragile little playthings.
But this race really challenged that idea.
So how did we even uncover this wild story?
Where we dug into an episode of the American History Hit podcast.
Featuring Buffalo historian Lindsay Lauren Visser.
She painted such a vivid picture of this race. It felt like you were right there in Times Square.
Bundled up in the freezing cold watching these daredevils set off.
It really makes you appreciate what those drivers and mechanics went through.
Seriously.
They were driving cars in conditions that would challenge even a modern SUV.
No kidding.
Imagine the breakdowns they must have had.
Then the repairs.
It really forced the public to confront the fact that cars were more than just fragile playthings.
They were capable of some serious stuff.
Right, they could be a viable mode of transportation.
So picture this Times Square, February 12, 1908.
A crowd of 250,000 people gathered to watch the start of this epic race.
6 cars lined up, all loaded down with supplies.
Drivers bundled from head to toe in layers to protect against the winter cold.
And they were heading west.
West towards Paris.
I still can't wrap my head around that.
The route itself is insane.
Tell me about it.
Well, the New York Times and a French newspaper called Le Matin, they teamed up to come up with this challenge.
They were basically trying to one-up a previous race from Peking to Paris.
Exactly.
So what was the plan?
Hold on to your hats.
Okay, I'm ready.
New York to San Francisco, then a boat to Alaska. Then they would drive across the frozen Bering Strait through Siberia into Europe and finally Paris.
It's mind-boggling.
And that's not even the craziest part.
What do you mean?
Just the cost of entry for these early automobiles was astronomical.
How much are we talking?
$6,000 to $12,000 in 1908.
Wow.
Which is like $180,000 to $360,000 today.
That is not your average entry fee.
Definitely not,
It really was a hobby for the rich.
as our historian put it.
Exactly.
And that financial barrier tells you a lot about the social context of this race.
Like what?
It was about national pride, showing off technological advancements as much as it was about speed.
It was a statement.
Oh yeah,
And speaking of national pride, good old President Teddy Roosevelt insisted that there had to be an American team.
of course he did.
So that's where the Buffalo-based E.R. Thomas Company comes in.
They were basically thrown into the race at the last minute.
Can you imagine the pressure?
I can't even
To
imagine.
be thrown onto the world stage with almost no time to prepare?
They had to scramble to get their car ready?
Their car, the Thomas Flyer, was pulled straight from the assembly line
It was a stock model.
with just a few extra fuel tanks thrown on.
And that's it.
No special modifications.
Nope.
So these guys were driving across continents in the dead of winter with no heater, no windshield, not even antifreeze.
Talk about roughing it.
It's insane.
But it's a testament to those drivers and mechanics.
Right.
They were pushing boundaries in every way.
In terms of what the cars could handle and what humans could endure.
Yeah, they were really pioneers.
And then, as if things couldn't get any crazier, right, as they start, a massive blizzard hits.
Oh yeah,
We're topping 8-foot snowdrifts across the Northeast.
it was brutal.
One of the cars dropped out after only 96 miles.
The other teams had to get really creative just to keep moving.
They were using wooden planks, even teams of horses to get through the snow.
It's amazing they didn't all just give up right there.
And get this, public opinion about the whole race was completely divided.
Yeah, you had people who were fascinated by these new machines.
And others who were so against them that they actually tried to sabotage the race.
It's really telling about the social anxieties around new technology.
Right.
Cars represented a huge change, a disruption to the way things had always been,
And change can be scary.
especially back then.
So people were reacting in different ways.
Some were excited, others were threatened.
There's this one story about American locals who helped the Thomas Flyer by clearing a path for them through the snow.
Sounds nice.
But then they turned around and refilled the path for the European teams.
Wow, talk about playing favorites.
Right, those national rivalries were coming out in some interesting ways.
The French team actually sent a letter to the Chicago Automobile Club.
What did they say?
They were complaining about everything, the high costs, the sabotage attempts, even the language barriers.
They felt like they were fighting a losing battle.
It's understandable.
This was more than just a race against the clock and the elements.
Yeah, it was a clash of cultures.
Their letter really captures their frustration.
He said that American locals were forcing them to hire more horses than they needed just to inflate the price.
So it wasn't exactly a fair fight.
Not really.
So to avoid these impossible roads, some teams resorted to driving on train tracks.
Seriously?
Imagine.
That must have been a wild ride.
Literally.
The tension of trying to outrun a locomotive.
It makes my palms sweat just thinking about it.
The American team actually got permission from the rail companies to drive on the tracks.
But even then, I bet there were some close calls.
Oh, I'm sure.
And one of the French teams, the Motobloc, they got so frustrated that they tried to secretly ship their car to San Francisco.
They tried to cheat.
Yeah, talk about a risky move.
It backfired big time.
What happened?
A journalist caught them red-handed, and they were disqualified from the race.
That's
gotta hurt.
Another team, the German Protos, they also used a train for a shorter distance.
But they ended up getting a 15-day penalty later on.
So even using the train wasn't a guaranteed shortcut?
Nope.
It's funny to think about this whole race.
Yep.
There was no rule book.
They were making it up as they went along.
Dealing with these crazy challenges and trying to figure out the rules at the same time.
That's part of what makes it so fascinating.
Right.
It was a true test of adaptability and resourcefulness.
On top of everything else.
Exactly.
So they originally estimated that it would take 22 days to reach San Francisco.
What a joke.
It actually took them 49 days.
Oof.
Yeah, they were driving 15 to 20 hours a day.
And every night, they had to manually drain and refill their radiators.
Can you imagine?
No mechanics to help them.
Just pure grit.
These weren't just drivers. They had to be mechanics, navigators, and improvisational geniuses all rolled into one.
And finally, after all that, the American team arrives in Alaska in the lead.
They must have thought the hardest part was over.
Right.
But Mother Nature had other plans.
This is where the story goes from adventurous to almost absurd.
What happened?
The snow started melting, and the route became completely impassable for cars.
Oh, no.
They actually considered disassembling the vehicles and transporting them on dog sleds.
That's hilarious.
I know, right?
It just shows how determined they were to finish this race no matter how crazy things got.
Thankfully, the race committee finally stepped in and said, enough is enough.
Thank goodness.
They canceled the Alaska section and shipped the teams to Japan to restart the race.
That was probably a relief for everyone involved.
But here's a twist.
What now?
The European teams took a faster steamer to Japan and ended up arriving before the Americans.
So they lost their lead.
Yep, just like that.
This race really was a roller coaster.
It wasn't just about speed and endurance.
It was about strategy, adaptability, and a whole lot of luck.
So they land in Vladivostok, ready for leg 2 of this epic journey.
And what awaited them in Siberia?
Well, the first thing the Russians told them was...
Go home.
Pretty much.
I bet they warned them about all the dangers.
Oh, yeah. They told them about mosquitoes the size of locusts, roving bandits' mud that could swallow a car whole, and even man-eating tigers.
Seriously, man-eating tigers.
Yep.
That sounds terrifying.
It does, doesn't it?
Like something out of an adventure novel.
You can say that again.
So what did they do?
The Russians actually suggested that they take the Trans-Siberian Railway.
The sensible option.
But these teams were determined to drive. They'd come too far to give up now.
So into the Siberian wilderness they went.
And it was even tougher than they could have imagined.
What were some of the challenges they faced?
Well, for one thing, there were no gas stations.
What?
You heard that right.
How did they refuel?
They had to carry extra gas with them and hope for the best.
That sounds stressful.
It was.
I bet.
The French team got so desperate for gas that they offered another team their remaining supply.
I bet there was a catch.
You know,
was...
they wanted that team's driver to switch sides and join their team.
They were willing to trade gas for a driver.
Yep, that's how badly they wanted to win.
Did it work?
Nope. Both the American and Italian teams refused the bribe.
Good for them.
The French team ended up having to withdraw from the race.
So close yet, so far.
And don't forget about those time penalties.
Oh, yeah.
Because of the Alaska detour and the train usage, the German team was given a 40-day penalty, and the Italian team got a 15-day penalty.
So the race was still anyone's game.
It became a strategic puzzle trying to balance speed with potential penalties.
It wasn't just about crossing the finish line first anymore.
And just to add another layer of drama, the Italian team's funding fell through while they were in Vladivostok.
Oh no, what did they do?
They had to scramble to find a way to keep going.
Talk about adding insult to injury.
Right?
They were literally stuck in Siberia with no money and a race to finish.
So there you have it.
What a story.
They crossed America, sailed across the Pacific, dealt with blizzards, sabotage, and even contemplated dog sleds.
It's unbelievable.
And the race is still far from over.
Stay tuned, because in the next part, we'll cover the final leg of this incredible journey.
From the wilds of Siberia to the heart of Paris.
I have a feeling there are a few more surprises in store.
I can't wait.
So we left those guys in Vladivostok, right?
Yep, facing down Siberia.
I bet they were starting to regret signing up for this whole thing.
Siberia was no joke.
No kidding. Forget those snowdrifts back in America.
Right, this was a whole other level of crazy.
We're talking mud that could swallow a car, whole swarms of mosquitoes bandits.
Oh, and did I mention the tigers?
Seriously, tigers.
Yeah.
This race really pushed them to their limits.
In every way you can imagine.
Not just physically, but mentally, too.
Right, think about the mental toughness it took to keep going day after day with all those challenges.
The cars were breaking down constantly. Parts were hard to come by. Communication was almost impossible.
They were navigating these vast, unmapped areas with no GPS, no detailed maps, just a compass and a lot of hope.
It's amazing they didn't lose their minds.
I know, right?
There's this quote from the American driver George Schuster where he said, "We just kept going. Didn't have time to think about much else but the road ahead."
I can't even imagine the pressure they must have been under.
The constant uncertainty, the language barrier, trying to find parts or get help in rural Siberia when you don't speak Russian.
Our historian actually mentioned this one detail that's almost comical.
Oh, what's that?
Apparently, there was this one paved road leading out of Vladivostok.
A paved road in Siberia sounds too good to be true.
It was.
Of course it was.
4 miles in, they hit a swamp.
Are you serious?
Yep. First, the German protos got stuck, then the American Thomas Flyer tried to go around and ended up in a bog.
So much for smooth sailing.
It was just one breakdown after another, one rescue after another.
And somehow they kept going.
I know, it's incredible.
What do you think kept them motivated through all of this?
Well, for one thing, Schuster, the American driver, he was also a brilliant mechanic.
Ah, so he was a real asset to the team.
He basically refused to let anyone else drive. He was that determined to see it through.
That's some serious dedication.
I think it was a combination of pride, stubbornness, and maybe a little bit of insanity.
I gotta be a little crazy to sign up for a race like this.
And while they were battling their way across Siberia, the German protos was making some serious progress.
Despite that 30-day penalty.
Right. They were known for their meticulous planning, and their car was actually more advanced than the others.
So they had a bit of an edge.
They reached Berlin first, and the crowds went wild, thinking they'd won the whole thing.
I bet the other teams were not happy about that.
But the French officials, they knew the Americans were still in it thanks to that 30-day window.
So the Germans were celebrating, but they knew it might all be for nothing.
Talk about a bittersweet victory.
I can't even imagine the tension.
When the Protos team found out that the Americans were closing in, they hightailed it out of Berlin and raced towards Paris.
It all came down to this final sprint to the finish line.
The Germans got to Paris first, but it was a pretty subdued celebration.
They had to wait and see if the Americans would arrive within that 30-day window.
So they were at the finish line, but the race wasn't over.
What a nail-biter.
And a few days later, the American team rolled into Paris to a hero's welcome.
They actually did it.
They had conquered the impossible.
But even in victory, there was one last unbelievable obstacle.
We're not going to believe this.
What happened?
As the Thomas Flyer was nearing the finish line, police sirens started blaring.
No way they got pulled over.
Yep, for not having a headlight.
You're kidding me.
Apparently, driving at night without a headlight was illegal in Paris.
After all that, after crossing continents and overcoming every obstacle imaginable, they get stopped for a traffic violation.
It's almost too perfect.
So what did they do?
Schuster, he wasn't about to let anything stop him now.
Of course not.
There was a guy nearby riding a bicycle with a headlight.
Wait a minute, don't tell me.
Schuster commandeered the bicycle, placed it in the front seat of the car, and kept driving.
He used the bicycle headlight to finish the race.
You can't make this stuff up.
That is the most amazing thing I've ever heard.
The police were probably dumbfounded, but they let him go.
And the Thomas Flyer, with a bicycle literally strapped to the front, reached the Lametan headquarters and were officially declared the winners.
Can you believe it?
What an ending!
It perfectly captures the spirit of this whole race, the adventure, the triumph of human will, and a good dose of absurdity.
They didn't just win, they won by a huge margin,
26 days.
which is still the largest margin of victory in any automotive competition ever.
They earned that 400-pound trophy.
It's a feat that will probably never be repeated.
This race wasn't just about speed,
It was about resilience, adaptability, ingenuity, and a whole lot of luck.
but it was also about something bigger than that, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, this race had a much bigger impact than anyone could have predicted.
It wasn't just about proving that a car could drive from New York to Paris,
It changed the way people thought about cars.
and that in turn changed the world.
It's amazing to think about the impact of this one crazy race.
Right, it wasn't just some pointless adventure.
Not at all. It actually changed the world.
I know we keep saying that.
But it's true.
So how did this one event change things so much?
Before, the race cars were seen as these delicate, expensive toys.
They're not super rich.
Exactly. But then you have these cars driving through blizzards, mud swamps, thousands of miles of rough roads.
They even survived sabotage attempts.
Right. It proved that cars were tougher and more reliable than anyone thought.
They weren't just novelties anymore.
They had the potential to connect people and places in a whole new way.
So it was a real turning point.
It shifted public perception of what a car could be,
From a plaything to a legitimate form of transportation.
and the timing was perfect.
How so?
This race happened right as Henry Ford was making cars affordable with the Model T.
So every day people are seeing these cars conquer the world.
And they're thinking, hey, maybe I could own one of those.
It created a market for Ford's vision.
Exactly. It sparked people's imaginations and made them realize that cars were the future.
It's kind of wild to think about how this one crazy race helped create the car culture we know today.
And the impact goes beyond just cars themselves.
What do you mean?
Think about the infrastructure. This race highlighted the need for better roads.
So we can thank or maybe blame this race for our modern highway systems.
And all the traffic that comes with them.
Yeah, there's always a trade-off.
But it wasn't just about roads.
What else?
It was also about connecting the world. This race fostered a sense of global connection and cooperation,
It showed what was possible when countries worked together.
even in competition.
We've talked about the impact on society and technology, but what about the people?
Those drivers and mechanics were true pioneers.
They risked their lives to make this happen.
They helped shape the modern world with their ingenuity, perseverance, and daring.
It's inspiring.
It really is.
So whatever happened to the winning car, the Thomas Flyer?
Sadly, the E.R. Thomas Company went bankrupt not long after the race.
What?
Ford's Model T was just too successful to compete with,
So the Thomas Flyer was sold off?
and it basically disappeared for decades.
Oh no, was it lost forever?
Thankfully, no.
What happened?
It was rediscovered in the 1960s and beautifully restored.
That's great, so people can still see it today.
Absolutely. It's currently touring various cities across the United States.
Wow, where can people see it?
You can find it at the Pierce Arrow Museum in Buffalo, New York.
That's awesome.
It's a piece of history.
So we've gone from the streets of New York to the heart of Paris. We've seen blizzards, swamps, sabotage attempts, and a bicycle headlight saving the day.
What a story.
It's full of twists and turns.
But it ultimately shows us what human ingenuity can achieve and how sometimes the most chaotic events can shape the world in unexpected ways.
We started with a race, but we ended up with a glimpse into a world on the cusp of transformation.
It's a reminder that history is full of surprises.
And as we step back from this incredible story, it leaves us with a question.
Yeah, what's that?
Could a race like this, with all its unpredictability and wildness, even happen in our world today?
It's a good question.
Something to think about.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
We'll be back next time with another fascinating story from history.
Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, keep asking questions.